What happens when psychedelics are treated not as therapies, but as sacraments? In this episode of the Psychedelic Podcast, I speak with Dr. Paul Ryder, founding minister of the Congregation for Sacred Practices, about an alternative framework for psychedelic work rooted in spirituality, ritual, and community. Paul shares how his own experiences led him to treat psychedelics as sacraments and why he believes the medical model, while valuable, represents only an early phase of this third wave of psychedelics. Together, we explore how the Congregation for Sacred Practices operates as both a church and a seminary, training licensed ministers to hold ceremonies ethically, safely, and within a religious framework. We also examine the role of community in long-term transformation, the distinction between therapists and ministers, and why practices like breathwork, meditation, and integration circles are central to spiritual development. Paul offers a grounded perspective on how psychedelics can support not just healing, but maturation, responsibility, and a deeper sense of purpose. Now, I met Paul in 2018 when I was hosting an event in San Francisco many years ago. He's been a friend for some time, so it was cool to be able to finally sit down with him and talk about this new initiative. He is a scholar, spiritual guide, and founding minister of the Congregation for Sacred Practices, a 501c3 religious organization devoted to community-based spiritual transformation and the ethical use of psychedelic sacraments. He holds a PhD in mythology, religious studies, and depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, an MS in developmental and social psychology from Rutgers, and a bachelor's in physics from Harvard, which is pretty cool. Prior to founding CSP in 2020, Paul worked in academia and consulting, applying deep pattern recognition, learning design, and strategic development across government, technology, and media. Okay, now we're going to go and hear from our sponsors. If you've been wanting to turn your passion for psychedelics into a meaningful and profitable practice, then check this out. Enrollment is now open for our microdosing practitioner certification program. And in just 18 weeks, you'll become a certified microdosing practitioner, mastering my signature San Pedro microdosing protocol for nervous system regulation while developing the somatic coaching and business skills to launch or expand your practice. This isn't just another theoretical course, it's hands-on, high-touch training that helps you integrate our microdosing protocol, refine your practitioner presence, and graduate ready to start enrolling clients right away. If you're ready to help others move from dysregulation to balance and build a thriving business doing work that matters, I'd love to see you in our next microdosing practitioner cohort. Just follow the link in the episode description or visit psychedeliccoaching.institute to learn more and apply. All right, folks, without further ado, let's get to our conversation with Dr. Paul Ryder. Paul, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here, Paul. Thank you for having me.
So we met about 7 years ago. I think it was December 2018. I was hosting an event in San Francisco at, I believe, the LGBT Center or something like that. In downtown San Francisco. We had a fun panel, and you were there, and we chatted for a little bit afterwards. And then we've run into each other at many events and conferences over the last 7 years. So I've been tracking what you're doing, and now it feels like with CSP, it's going to be a fun thing to dive into. So bring me back to December 2018. What were you doing at that time? What were you up to? And talk to us a little bit about how, when did CSP start to come into the picture for you?
It was around the same time. I think CSP, I'd been trained and I've been running in a sort of a standard underground practice, might be the way you would put it. And Michael Pollan's book came out, and I thought, okay, well, thank you for the business, because now everybody wants to talk to me. But they don't want to talk about the things I want to talk about anymore. They came in and it's like, well, I want to pee diamonds, or I want 5 grams of mushrooms because that's what the book said I should have, or I've got this, I've got ADD, or I've got depression, or and it all became very medical. And I realized, like, that's not how I've ever experienced any of these sacraments. They've always been sacraments to me. I've always had a spiritual connection to them. And it would never have occurred to me to use them for PTSD or depression or anxiety or And so really it was that kind of shift. I'm like, okay, I can write a lot of blog posts about how these are spiritual molecules, and that the most interesting use for them is not uh, to stop at the horizon of kind of getting people back to baseline and getting them back to work, um, which is kind of the my one of my degrees is in developmental and social psychology, and part of the enterprise of psychology was is always getting people back to within the normative range. They weren't about um, pushing beyond that. I thought that's never been my experience with these things. So I can write blog posts or I can do something. And so we founded a church really with the intention specifically to hold these molecules as sacraments, um, and really as a public statement about the psychomedical model is not the highest, most interesting, or best use for these things. Um, what else is possible when you begin thinking about the unfolding of soul into the world, or the unfolding of your own life force into the world, um, and the connection to our own divinity, and whatever this thing is that's going on out there. um, that's where we want to sit and uh, hold ceremony for people, um, because that was our experience, and not you know getting our CAP scores to go down on our PTSD scales. Um, and that work is important. I think it's valuable, and I think it's the on ramp for really being able to connect. Healing in general is the on ramp for being able to connect to your own life force, connect to your own unfolding, to connect to your own, um, you know, seed or spark of your own destiny, and then be able to manifest that into the world. You know, yeah, you got to clean up a bunch of stuff before you can even think about doing any of that. But then we want an institution where you could come in community, and really be able to support each other in this bigger project of, well, how do you unfold yourself into being?
So here's a little kind of fun through point on this. The sort of medicalization of psychedelics, as you're talking about, right? Their use for PTSD and depression seem to be more than anything a strategic move on the part of some of the initial architects of, let's say, the modern psychedelic renaissance. So, I love your acronym CSP because it reminds me of Bob Jesse's Council for Spiritual
Yeah.
Practice, which was sort of this initial meeting of figures where him and Roland Griffiths decided that they would start to do this clinical research on psilocybin, right? And so Bill Richards
Right.
had been doing it in the 60s and 70s. They combined and they say, okay, we got to first establish the fact that psilocybin can occasion these mystical type experiences. It is spiritually valuable. And then we can sort of on top of that talk about the applied practice from a mental health perspective. And they showed in that research that the stronger a quote unquote mystical experience someone had, the more impactful the healing process was with psychedelics. So in some ways you're going, okay, let's deconstruct again. Let's actually get back to the first principle, the root or foundation of this, which is really how psychedelics can help to facilitate spiritual health. So I'd love for you to sort of explicate that a little bit more for us in terms of what does it mean to then treat these substances as sacraments rather than just tools or therapies? How does it change our relationship with entheogens or psychedelics?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would start with around intention setting. When people begin this work, often um, they'll arrive with some sense of like, oh, if you've got a well-trained guide or minister or therapist, be like, well, what's your intention for going into this work? Set is an important part of the efficacy. And usually, we'll begin with like, well, I have, this particular history, this particular childhood, this particular set of things that didn't go as anticipated, uh, this particular set of traumas. I want to dig on those. And the work can be very valuable for that. At some point, um, and usually I let it happen on the part of the person coming to see me, the member of the congregation, that they'll walk in one day and just go, I don't really want to dig anymore on my history. I'm not really that interested in it. I feel like the things that might be impacting my ability to live my own life, um, they've kind of been cleaned up. Like I'm no longer, you know, programmed in this particular way. And they begin wondering what's next. They begin just naturally making their own transition into the questions around growth. Like, well, what else is possible? Where else do I want to go? Um, and so the intention shifts. Um, and the intention shifts from I'm trying to fix something that's broken, or I'm trying to fix a problem in the past. And if you listen to that language, it still all has the language of ego. There's a problem, I need to fix it. You know, and I really need to dig in, take this seriously. I really need to go after this healing. You know, um, but it still comes out of this kind of egoic, like I'm going to fix. Um, and when people move into this other space, like almost a different syntax of how they approach the world is like, what's trying to play itself through me? What's alive inside of me that's given to me to do uniquely? How do I tune myself to the vibration of being and then go about my day from a space of love and from a space of creativity and from a space of expansion? And that's a very different intention. It's a very different kind of feeling. Um, and I find that people fairly naturally gravitate from one to the other. Many people, because of the zeitgeist, they come in and they'll say, yeah, I'm here because there's this thing. My friend said I could get over my whatever if I came and saw you. Um, you know, and they'll come to either a solo ceremony or a group ceremony. And it doesn't take long until people, begin, thinking, okay, I'm beginning to see my history and I'm becoming more interested in myself and my own unfolding and what is this thing I keep contacting inside of me. At first it's like, oh, I have these memories, I have these traumas, I have these things that perhaps I've forgotten, perhaps I still remember and I've been living with. um, at some point they go, I'm not so interested in what the content that's coming up is. I'm interested in where it's coming from. Like, what is this spiritual thing that is now inside of me trying to heal itself? I'm interested in the origin of it rather than, each of the new things I dig up. Oh, I finally see how my mother's alcoholism did this in my life, or I finally see how my father's neglect did this in my life, or I finally see how being the third born led to this in my life. Um, that that whole project becomes less interesting, which is a normal psychological, understanding. And the kind of like, well, I'm here now. What do I want to be? How do I want to unfold? What do I want to become? Um, what is the song of my soul that wants to be sung? Completely different intention, um, and that naturally emerges. One naturally emerges or emerges on top of the healing. You can't skip the healing phase. But then when you're done, you don't want to be sent home because your therapist is out of things to talk to you about.
Right.
you know.
Right. Well, and I think one thing I want to bookmark, because we'll come back to it shortly, will be, the role of a minister then in creating a container or a space for the flourishing of that, right? And the role that a minister plays is different than the role that a therapist plays. And I want to talk about some of the nuances of that, because I think it's important that we bring more clarity and understanding to that. But before we get into that, just to cover something very practical, what is the Congregation for sacred practices? Just kind of give us the 411 about what is this, what how does it work? How would you define it? What's maybe your mission, vision, values with CSP?
I'll give you the normal stats. We're a 501c3 religious nonprofit. So we're a church according to the common vernacular of the IRS. We have two main things that we do. One, we have a seminary where we have a 4-year training that you just mentioned. And then graduates of that seminary are licensed ministers, and they're eligible to carry sacrament and be protected by RFRA to do that.
Which is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, just for our listeners.
Yes, yes. And then the second thing we do, which is actually I think the more important work and the more emergent work, is we build community, and we're in community together. All the ministers, have been trained together, so they naturally form bonds. But then also all the people they serve are part of our community. So we, do all the normal stuff churches do, like have potlucks and have song circles, and we do things that normal churches don't do, like take a microdose and go hiking in the woods and listen to the trees. But there's still these kind of group activities. We do online breath work, online meditation, online integration circles. So there's these sort of normal things that churches do. And then we also hold ceremonies with sacrament. And you usually work with MDMA and psilocybin are the two main ones that we work with. And then all the ministers agree that they'll only serve to the level of their training and competency. So we have a few ministers that have been trained to work with ketamine or 5-MeO, maybe 2 with LSD. But there's, in general, this community aspect of their ceremony individually, their ceremony group-wise. We have different formats for ceremonies. One we call a community ceremony, where people are actually interacting with each other, and then others that are these communion ceremonies that are much more like a traditional deep dive, put on your eye mask, stay in your own lane, and continue to operate and experiment with even different kinds of format for how to weave our souls together, weave our lives together, weave our intentions together. So the congregational aspect is a big piece of what we're doing in addition to the seminary. And that's where we think the biggest medicine is for people is like sacrament's great, but really what the basic stuff we all want, like belonging and connection and shared purpose and community, all of that is available in the congregation. And that's why churches are churches. That's what people go to church for. Is to have all those things, is to get a sense of like, oh, I'm in a context. This is my community. I have people I can work with, both about like normal life stuff, like can you walk my dog, but also more spiritual stuff, like I just had this ceremony and I need to talk to somebody about it. So the community aspect is a really important aspect of what we're doing. Sometimes we've actually toyed with the idea, are we an order of some kind, that you get this training and you learn to do this kind of work? I don't think we're mature enough exactly to know if, how to answer those questions. I'm not sure the Jesuits knew they were Jesuits until 100 years later, after everyone was dead. It started the Jesuits. I don't think Francis set out to, form the Franciscans. So we don't know exactly where this might go someday in terms of like, what is its structure? But right now, it's a community of people and a seminary that trains ministers to hold ceremony.
And one question that's coming up, is it rooted in some way in some of the Christian tradition? I mean, partly just because you mentioned those two examples, but also if you look at, the UDV or Santo Daime, these two other syncretic churches that have also gotten religious protection, they are a syncretic Christian church, right? So I'm curious, what is the sort of role of Christianity versus maybe Buddhism or, other spiritual practices within CSP?
Yeah. So I did my doctoral work on comparative religion. and mythology and psychology. I've always been very hesitant to throw my lot in with any one tradition. Um, what I've realized is really what we are is a process-based religion rather than a dogma-based religion. So as I was mentioning, we start with people typically around some kind of healing because that's often why people come. Um, and then eventually they turn the corner and we support them as they go about like, well, how do I want to live my life and what are my values and what do I want to express in the world? Um, that process is something that we teach people to support and follow. And there are kind of recognizable milestones, around that in terms of you know, psycho spiritual development, where it's like, oh, you're actually discovered that you have a soul. Now you're actually speaking from your soul, and your ego is beginning to find its place in relationship to your soul. Um, and this is what that sounds like, and this is the kinds of questions people ask when they kind of move through their own growth and maturing as a spiritual being in the world. Um, and so we see ourselves more as like tracking the process of people evolving rather than you have to believe the following things. Um, and some of those are supported by the practices I was mentioning, why we're the Congregation for Sacred Practices and not the Congregation for Sacred Medicine. Is that, breath work can support your own evolution, integration circles can support your own evolution, meditation can support your own evolution. It's about your own awakening to your own being. It's not about taking medicine. Um, and the awakening is not uh, dictated by a particular framework, like what does it mean to be an awake Christian or Buddhist or Sufi or Kabbalist or Hindu or Shivite or yogi. It's like they all point in some way to this thing called, hey, at some point you realize you're the author of your own life and you have to take responsibility for living it. And the rules might help you get there. Um, but they're like the first stage of the Gemini rockets that sent the Apollo missions into space. You burn the fuel and then you don't need them anymore. And people become aware of their own unfolding, their own process. And that's what we're encouraging people to do rather than take any particular tradition. Um, Fortunately, we have lots of ministers that come from different backgrounds so that when people come in with a particular religious lexicon, they come in and they grew up Jewish, or they come in and they grew up evangelical, or they come in and grew up mainline Protestant, or they come in and I've been doing yoga since they were 12. We have folks that can resonate with that particular lexicon and are pretty deep in that knowledge. But not everybody has every particular background. So it's one of the benefits of having a somewhere between around 60 licensed ministers. We can probably find someone that has some relationship to your particular background if that's important to you.
Let's talk a little bit about then the training program, because I would love to spend a healthy chunk of time better understanding that. So it's a 4-year minister training program. I grew up in a very Christian home. So my dad went to seminary for a year. My mom went to seminary for a couple of years. We had a seminary that was basically integrated with the liberal arts school that I went, Western Theological Seminary. So I'm very familiar with some of the different tracks and tensions and reasons why people attend ceremony. And I imagine there's sort of a mainstream accreditation associated with these seminaries as well. So talk to us a little bit about the design of that 4-year minister training program, and what does it mean to be accredited as an entheogenic seminary as part of that? After a decade of professional experience in the psychedelic space, I've learned that direct experience with these medicines is essential. And that's why our practitioner certification program includes something rare, a week-long immersive intensive at Brave Earth, a regenerative community and healing arts center in the lush jungles of Costa Rica. This is more than an online certification. It's a comprehensive learning journey that combines psilocybin experiences, daily yoga and meditation, a temescal ceremony, in-person coaching, and hands-on leadership development, all set against the backdrop of volcanic hot springs and cloud forests. The intensive is fully included in your tuition as part of our 6-month program that fuses cutting-edge psychedelic education with practical coaching skills. You'll learn directly from me, our world-class faculty, and other leaders who are shaping the future of psychedelic practice. Join a global community of coaches at the leading edge of this third wave of psychedelics and walk away with the confidence, clarity, and credibility to guide others safely and effectively. If you're ready to elevate your practice, learn more, and apply for our next cohort at psychedeliccoaching.institute. Again, that's psychedeliccoaching.institute, or check the link in the description.
So I'll do the easy part first. The accreditation is through the Global Accreditation Council. They're located in The Hague. We went and took our program to them to say, hey, you're an accrediting agency, and you specialize in accrediting organizations that that do what we do. So it's the world of people that are studying human potential. They're studying emergent knowledge. They're studying, or their programs are, but also hybrid. So they understand something about the in-person versus online things. So there's a lot that we liked about working with them around the accreditation. I used to be a professor at USF, and I ran their executive master's in business administration, their executive MBA program. And I saw what accreditation can do to a school when the accrediting body is not aligned with the values of the school. They came in that particular case. This accrediting body came in and they had a very particular matrix of how many PhDs do you have to have, how many articles do they have to have published, how many teaching PhDs can you have, and they had this little matrix. And what it ended up doing was putting a bunch of professors that were research professors in the classroom that they never should have been in a classroom, and letting go of a bunch of teachers that in some cases, were not PhDs, but were really good at teaching the thing they needed to teach. Now, that would be okay if it were Berkeley, because Berkeley's mission is research, as well as education. But this was USF, run by a bunch of Jesuits, and the stated mission of the organization is to become a teaching university.
Right.
So they ended up violating their own mission in order to get this accreditation. And I wanted to make sure that didn't happen to us. So we went in search of an accrediting body that was like, they understand adults, they understand hybrid, they understand emergent education. They understand that in this case, there's not a whole lot of PhDs in entheogenic studies you could put in a classroom anyway.
Right.
So they were the accrediting body. And what they did for us was they went through our program and they said, here's the things that we love about what you're doing, and here's things that we'd want to see. And we were able to formalize our program a little bit more. And even around things like evaluation, for instance, you go to a normal training program in any of the entheogenic studies world, and you show up and you pass and you get a certificate. There's, as long as you showed up and did all the things, then you're going to graduate, so to speak. I said, well, you probably should evaluate people. And we were like, yeah, we probably should, if they're going to move through a multiple year training program. We also formalize it into semesters. Like many of these, our first training program, started in a March, and it ran as long as it ran. And then when we were done, we caught our breath for a few months, and then we started another one. There was no real rhythm to it other than, moving people, because we were the only teachers, my partner and I. And the creation of a formal training program where it runs on a semester basis and we can attract other faculty that now know how to run courses where I'm not the only teacher. That's all part of an accrediting process where it's, a school built around one person is not really something you can accredit. And it's not something that you could then offer master's degrees and PhDs
Mm.
in. And that's what accrediting does for you, is that you can, offer advanced studies and advanced degrees. Um, so we're in this kind of transition now. We've done all the things to be accredited. It's interesting to watch how the system, how it works itself out. So we now have uh, a, the 4 years. The first year is really built around preparation and reading and developing your own spiritual practices, developing your own connection to the divine, um, and learning to be in and learning what spiritual direction is with other people and how that might be different than psychotherapy or different than counseling or different than executive coaching. What is spiritual direction? We spend the first year on that. And then the second year we spend exclusively working with sacrament. Um, and one of the designs we have is that people trade. So you don't have to go to Mexico, or you don't have to go to Costa Rica, or you don't, have to go to Amsterdam, where, I know you were involved, with synthesis.
Mm.
Um, you don't have to leave the country to trade. Um, and it's built into the training. It's not something where we do all these videos and we do all these conversations and we do all this community projects and papers, and then you go away for a week to have an experience. That's all built into the actual training. And we have, supervision circles, and people are in constant conversation about, oh, I traded with so and so last week, and here's what came up, and what I want to try next time, and what I'm confused about. And then everybody also receives trades, and we have observers that get to observe each of the trades. So there's always a triangle going on, and everybody gets evaluated, on, hey, how well did the minister do on their practice trade. As far as I know, we're the only group that has formalized live trades as part of the design of the training. Um, but that might be changing. Most of the universities can't do that because they can't get insurance for it.
Mm.
So Naropa had to spin out their program. CIAS is uh, quite reactive about people taking medicine as part of the
Oh yeah.
training.
Oh yeah.
Um, you know, they'll throw you out of the program
Right.
because they want to preserve their accreditation. Again, an accrediting body that is not supporting the direction of the school, um, and many of the other training programs are, it's an academic discipline, but there's no practice.
Sure.
So that's the second year. Is we work with MDMA the first semester, the Ninos, the mushrooms, psilocybin the second semester, and then there's 4 semesters of supervision. So you're assigned to a supervision group every 6 months. You can trade. You might love your supervisor in your group and you can stay with it, or you may want to jump to a different group of people and a different supervisor. So there's 4 years of that, and in that period, they're also completing all the other requirements in the training that are outside of the core minister training. For instance, we don't teach anything specifically about body work and energy work as part of the core training, but we do require it for your graduation. And so it's a little bit of it started out as kind of a make your own master's degree of, like, you can go here, 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 or here to get that training. We're beginning to have faculty come into the seminary that are interested in training specifically for our people, um, around teaching kind of advanced preparation, advanced integration skills, um, energy work, body work. One of the requirements we have is that everybody has, to your question before, some kind of spiritual worldview that they're familiar with. Um, and we're agnostic about what it is. Um, so we've done, courses on Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan, non-dual kind of philosopher. Um, we've done courses on yoga. We've done courses. I've got one that I really want to teach called uh, um, Religious Worldviews and Entheogenic Practice. And kind of take the philosophy of psychology, for instance, and then pair it with MDMA and say, this is why this medicine is so good at psychology because they resonate with each other. Um, and then take a somatic, but psychology is only one worldview. What about somatics?
Yeah.
Well, let's study somatics for a while and then go take some mushrooms and be like, oh, I see how these two things go together. Let's go study non-dualism and then go smoke some 5-MeO. It's like, oh, I see why this medicine and this worldview kind of have a resonance with each other. So there's an importance of having some kind of framework, because everybody that moves out of their healing phase usually begins asking the question, well, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of life? What's actually going on? Um, and religious thinkers are the ones that have tried to answer those questions. Typically, the psychologists have not tried to answer those questions, and so they need some kind of worldview. So that's part of the training. We have a course where we require people to do um, uh, some kind of education in current psychedelic research.
Mm.
And for those that go on to get master's degrees, they actually have to do a lot more work in that area. Um, so all that training is also happening in that second 2 years, along with their supervision.
Mm.
I think that covers everything. I'm not sure if I got all the 4 years out.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to come back to was the trades, because you mentioned trades, which
Okay.
I think I understand, but if you could help create some more clarity around that. When you're talking about trading, are you talking about guiding each other one-to-one in person and practicing on each other? Are you talking about doing this virtual over Zoom? Are you talking about, is it in small groups? Kind of give us a little bit more detail in terms of when you're actively creating that trade environment, that trade
Yeah.
network for the folks who are going through the training. I'm particularly interested in like in-person versus virtual within this sort
Yeah.
of congregation model.
Yeah. We don't train anybody to hold ceremony virtually. You can do the preparation, you can do the integration virtually. Kind of everybody's used to that now. When we first started, it was pre-COVID, and um, everybody did everything in person.
Right.
I think people have gotten accustomed to Zoom now for the things that you really don't have to be in person for. I, I guess as a prerogative of a founder, I tried to do a couple of virtual ceremonies during COVID. I thought it was horrible, and said, I don't think this works. And so we don't teach that and we don't encourage it. So it's in person. Um, it is a very complex process for people to get their trades organized with each other, particularly because there's 3 people in each trade. Um, Sometimes they will get together and do 2 back to back. And we require 4 in each position as you go through the training. So there's 12 in the second year. There's 12 times you're going to have to be in a room with somebody else.
Wow.
In one of those roles. And we also bring people together at least twice during the semester for like 3-day teaching weekends. So often people are, if they're flying in or they don't live near each other, they'll fly in 2 days early. They'll get some of their trades done, or they'll stay a couple days late and get some of their trades done. We've had people come up with creative solutions. 6 of them will fly to an Airbnb and stay there the week and try to do a bunch of trades with each other. I tell them not to do more than 2 days in a row in any particular role because it's exhausting. And the young ones crack me up because if they haven't done it before, they really have no idea how wiped out you're going to be afterwards if you're a minister.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I'll be the minister in the morning and then I'll observe in the afternoon. I'm like, you will fall asleep and you won't be happy that you're there. Or they'll be the minister in the morning. They'll think I want to be the minister in the morning and I want to be the journeyer in the afternoon. And I'm like, that's no. How about no? And even 2 days apart is a day between each journey is probably best. But to be practical, sometimes people are, flying in, they're staying in a place, it's expensive, and they want to kind of maximize the amount of time they have together. But the folks that have, like, a triad has gotten together and tried to play all 3 roles over the course of 3 days, and they they understood why I told them I thought that was a bad idea after the end of it, because they were just kind of vegetables by the third trade. But yeah, it's all live, and that's really the only way that you can. I think you can hold an energetic container for someone is you have to be in the field, you have to be in their presence. Um, Maybe if you were a particularly powerful field holder, you could find a way to do this over Zoom, but we haven't trained any of those people yet that could hold a field from that far away.
Right.
Um, I certainly can't. I need to be in the room with somebody and just to be able to see what's happening for them and what they might need, and also to cultivate the energetic field around them. We don't do a lot. We're very non-interventionist in our approach and our teaching. We believe that people are the prophets of their own lives, and they're going to go meet themselves, and our job is to write it down. Um, for people that might be having a hard time getting in or might be stuck in some loop that they can't seem to get out of even after a certain period of time, there may be little interventions we can support them with to help them move into
Get
it.
unstuck. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, to get unstuck. And sometimes I'll tell students, you know, um, you have to figure out, are they stuck or is this an escape room? Um, that that they need to find their own way out. So you have to let them be in the whatever it is that's happening, because they're solving a riddle for themselves.
Mm.
And if you get in there and be like, well, how about if I rub your feet? In the middle of that, you're like, I was busy trying to get out of this escape room. But yeah, foot rub sounds great. Um, and they missed the opportunity to learn whatever they needed to learn.
Right.
So we sit pretty far behind the medicine, not to the point where we're neglectful, um, but we got to have a really good reason to go over there and do something.
For sure.
Because people need to be able to be in their own energy and their own resonance. But that's why our job is to hold the field and to keep it safe.
So when it comes to, let's talk about ministers and churches, right? I grew up in the
Okay.
church. Christianity is quite old at this point in time, 1,700 years old, many would say. So there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of churches. Usually you go, you train to become a minister, and then there's a church that brings you on to minister at that church, in that parish, with that congregation. There are a lot of psychedelic churches at this point in time, right? And so it's a bit of a different approach, where you're saying we're going to train the ministers, and we will trust that what will unfold from that is a congregation, and maybe at some point, even a physical space. I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts, even from a visionary perspective, of how do you see this unfolding over the next 5 to 10 years? Is it your hope that these ministers that you're training will go out and actually start physical churches for communities all over? Is it more that folks want to be, smaller and going to people's homes and doing it that way? Kind of, how do you look at the sort of relationship of the church, quote unquote, with this congregation for sacred practices, or temple, or whatever sort of frame you want to put around it, but a physical space where people come together for this work?
I would love to have a physical space where people can come, because there's something about walking into a space that shifts the nervous system all by itself. When you walk into a church, you're not supposed to yell. And all of a sudden everybody's talking quietly. There's a reverence, and a temple, a mosque, all the different places, all the religious architecture. We walk into it and go, oh, and then some other part of us emerges that's like, I recognize what this is. This is not the place you scream and yell. That's like at a stadium. If I'm in a stadium, I can scream and yell. This is a church. So I think the physical infrastructure is important. Frank Lloyd Wright, beautiful quote from him that he said, first we create the buildings and then they create us. And that's kind of life. First we create our vision, our intentions, and whatever, and then it creates us as we live into it. Um, so I would love to have a physical space that requires, a significant amount of fundraising and a discussion about where would this place be, because we're all over the U.S. Um, we have a house in DC that's well suited. We renovated the basement, so we have a journey room for about 12. And then we have a separate journey room that we do our solo journeys in. So we have a physical space, and that might be enough. That people are like, we're creating house churches. Do we need a physical space? I don't know. Um, I think again, I'm pretty sure that Christians from the second century were probably not thinking about St. Peter's. They have no idea what their future was. They probably would be appalled by it. That particular building seems to give me the creeps every time I go into it. But so I don't know. I think that's it definitely feels like the importance of being attuned to what spirit is wanting. And how this is unfolding and letting it unfold is the work for us, because there is this desire to grab onto other models and say, oh well, churches have buildings, or are we in order? Well, let's go look up and see what orders are. Are we a professional association of chaplains? That are mostly out running their own, their own thing as a practice. That doesn't really fit either, because we seem to come together as a group of people wanting to accomplish something together. So kind of a professional network of chaplains doesn't fit. It's not really an order. It's not really a church in the sense of having a physical building that we go to. We're not sure what it is yet, honestly. And I think that's part of the excitement about being in this work is being navigated by some kind of internal sense of like, follow the brightest lines, follow the brightest light, follow when you put something out into the world, follow what echoes the loudest, in an alive conversation with what is unfolding, inside and outside. And whether that involves a building or not, I have my opinions. I would love that, but we'll see. We'll see where that goes. And I think there's I've owned enough real estate in my life to know that you know maintaining a building is its own project, and may or may not be supportive of the overall mission. And when people get too involved in their buildings, and your board of trustees is only concerned about the building fund, they can take their eye off the mission pretty easily. And so there's, it's all a matter of feeling like, how does this thing unfold? What we know now is uh, to your point, training ministers has gotten a lot of traction. Um, and then the ministers are getting traction, building a community and inviting people into the conversation of awakening, um, rather than only kind of keeping them in the conversation of healing. Um, Beyond that, I'm not sure we know. I'm not sure the mushrooms know what they're doing when their mycelium is just going like this. I'm not sure they have a mission statement to be like, am I trying to get over to that redwood tree to take the redwood tree's water over to that other redwood tree? I'm not sure they're navigating that way.
Yeah, and I feel that, and where it lives in you, this emergent unfolding, and the architect side of me or engineering side of me can't help but give sort of thought to the fact that, potentially many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people might start to be interested in this or curious about it, right? And so well, we have to allow things to unfold in their time, and as we've
Yeah.
experienced, and even some of the medical part, we think there's a timeline, but that timeline gets way thrown off, with the rejection of MDMA as an example. And I
Uh,
feel like to give that thought some time and energy and maybe some resources even would prove to be invaluable, not specifically to you, but generally for the community and those who are working in psychedelics. There's a lot of time, energy, thought, and resources that are going into biotech drug development and phase 3 clinical trials and medical approval and
yeah.
even legal policy. I don't see as much time, thought, energy, and resources going into physical spaces where people can gather in community within sort of a church-based model. And so my hope is that we sort of direct more of our thought and energy and resources towards that. But I think you're right. It's like it's a much slower unfolding than traditional capitalism, and that comes with trade-offs, upsides and downsides.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I take is, kind of maybe the metaphor is again thinking about, well, how do the mushrooms work?
Mm.
Um, you know, yes, there's a mycelium. Yes, they pop out these things. Maybe they're called buildings. Every once in a while, there's like some convening around that particular thing, and then it moves on. And yet
Mm.
the substrate is still alive. The the spiritual practice and the being in the world and the invitation to have a spiritual sensibility and to engage in ritual with or without a building, um, is the thing to follow. And if it leads to buildings, there are things you can do when you have a building you can't do. Um, the amount of money we spend on renting, weekend facilities, is it certainly justifies having one building instead. We could pay a mortgage instead of
Right.
renting, renting retreat centers, 10 times a year. Um, and and yet it it we're in kind of that dance of like, is now the time?
Right.
Um, and is now is now the time for that structure? I think I can tell you the structures where we have been concentrating our energy around structures is kind of internal governance of the community.
Mm.
Um, so we have a medical committee, and we have a ministry committee, and we have an ethics committee, and we have a member engagement committee, and we have uh, a legal committee. Um, I'm sure that we have a technology committee. So the community itself is learning to govern itself. Um, and that, to some extent, a lot more like mycelium, it's about people connecting to each other and kind of in a quiet underground, not underground in the sense of, below the law, um, but underground in the sense of it, you can't really see all of it. We
Hmm.
don't have a big splashy web page or, have this big crystal cathedral, to attract people to come. Um, but the internal work of building the structure for communities so that as the community expands, the more important thing is, how does the community respond to, um, I've got this particular legal situation, medical situation, health situation, ethical situation. Um, how does the community digest and navigate through that?
Right.
Um, Last job was as a professor of organizational behavior and leadership. So that's where I tend to want to concentrate, is making sure that the organization is well positioned to adapt.
Mm.
Um, and if there's new medical stuff coming out or new legal stuff coming out, or new technology that we can deploy to support, um, you know clarity and safety and consent and proper note taking and all the other things that we build, that's where the energy is going right now. And the idea of also having to maintain a physical property besides the one I live in is
Right.
like,
Yeah.
oh dear,
It's a lot.
um, and I think we're getting close now because we've got a faculty at the seminary that feels like I won't be leading all the courses in the near future.
Hmm.
Um, and we've got medical people who can answer things, and when someone can't, we have a minister portal that all the ministers use to send out intake forms and send out uh, membership agreements and releases of liability and all the other stuff. And when they can't log in, they don't call me anymore. Yay.
That's good.
You know, um, but the kind of the infrastructure of the operation feels like that part's stabilizing enough that we will begin asking, well, where do we go next?
Right.
Um, and
Right.
and certainly one of the things on that list um, is a building.
Mm.
Another thing on that list is raising a scholarship fund for scholarships um, for underserved populations, because it's not inexpensive to go through a 4-year training program.
Right.
There's other things on that, and we're always fundraising. We've raised probably a third of our budget last year. Um, just from people that were generous enough to donate and philanthropists that were interested in what we were doing. Um, Veterans is its own entity. We have several veterans that we have trained that hold ceremony. And do we want to make that into a bigger program all by itself? They're doing it at a small scale. Um, in terms of finding sponsorships for them to work with people that with veterans that can't afford their services. Um, how big does that become?
Mm.
Um, Honestly, we're probably the only organization that I know of that um, could put 150 veterans through the MAPS phase 3 protocol next year
Oh wow.
if we had the money.
Oh wow.
Um, that it's we're at a scale that, and we can do it in the U.S. You don't have to fly to Mexico. You don't have to fly to Costa Rica.
Right.
Um, and we think there are ways that we could even service more people once we get a protocol that would include group integration toward the end of it.
Mm.
Um, because the MAPS protocol is extraordinarily expensive the way it was the way it was designed, but
Mm.
it is the gold standard. So we'd want to start with that as a starting point, and then figure out where can we bring more community to it,
Mm.
because it's very much in the psychological, like you and your therapist kind of model.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but that's a scalable option that uh, we're not we're that's also become a big project, you know.
Right. Right.
So we're
Yeah.
just catching our breath with the projects we've already done. But I think we are at uh, enough of velocity that we can kind of feel like, okay, this will keep going, and we don't have to breathe into it every minute of the day.
Right. Yeah, it's taken on a life of its own. Well, Paul, I wanna thank you for coming on the show today. I want to thank you for joining us on the podcast. If folks do want to learn more about the Congregation for Sacred Practices, what's a good spot? Where can we send them or link them to?
Yeah, the best place to start is at sacredpractices.org.
Okay.
That has everything about the seminary and the training and the course catalog and what's coming up. We're just beginning with this accreditation to begin offering master's degrees and PhD studies. Um, and then there's also there a list of we mainly, because of where the trainings have happened, the in-person events are usually either in the Bay Area and around San Francisco, in the DC metropolitan area, or in Boulder, because that's where we've attracted the most ministers to come through the training, and they went home, and that's where it is. We also have groups of ministers, little pockets like in Sacramento, Boston, The Southeast is beginning to, you know, find a little group around Atlanta. Um, but there are more and more live events that we're doing. There's lots of online events, the breathwork and the integration circles and the other things that I mentioned. Um, so if you want to participate in something, you can register for any event there. Um, we have an online community you can find through that we run a Mighty Networks online community. So lots and lots of resources and playlists and shared information and uh, trip reports and all the other things that you would see in a community are available. And you can find that at Sacred Practices, or the links to that at sacredpractices.org as well. And of course, a giant donate button. Um, we do raise about a third of our operating budget through philanthropy, like any other church. Tuition and fees only go so far.
Right. All right. Sacredpractices.org is the website. Paul, I appreciate you coming on and sharing so much with our audience today, and I wish you all the best of luck with Congregation for Sacred Practices.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Good talking to you.